What if I told you that toxic people aren't in your life by accident, but by invitation? An invitation you've been sending without even knowing it. Carl Jung made a discovery that changes everything about how you deal with difficult people. The problem isn't them, it's the part of you that allows them to stay. Jung understood that every toxic person in your life is a mirror reflecting back the respect you refuse to give yourself. They're not the disease, they're the symptom. And until you understand what they're showing you about your own psychology, you'll keep attracting the same patterns over and over in different faces with different names, but always the same dynamic. You see, most people think respect is about standing up to toxic people, about fighting back, about setting boundaries through force. But Jung knew better. He understood that true self-respect doesn't come from controlling others. It comes from integrating the parts of yourself you've been rejecting, the parts that make you vulnerable to toxicity in the first place. Every person who drains you, manipulates you, disrespects you, is accessing a wound inside you, a place where you don't respect yourself. And they can sense it, like sharks sense blood in water. Toxic people are attracted to unintegrated shadows, to the parts of you that haven't learned to say no, that still seek approval, that still believe you need to earn your worth. And here's what Jung discovered that will change how you see every relationship in your life. The toxic people aren't doing something to you. They're responding to something in you, a frequency. You're broadcasting a signal that says, I don't value myself, so neither should you. And until you change that signal at the deepest psychological level, no boundary, no confrontation, no cutting people off will ever truly work, because you'll just attract new versions of the same dynamic. This isn't about blame. It's about power. It's about understanding that the moment you truly respect yourself, at the level of your unconscious mind, toxic people either transform their behavior around you, or they simply disappear from your life without drama, without fight, without you having to do anything, because you're no longer a vibrational match for their toxicity. But getting to that place requires something most people aren't willing to do. It requires you to face the shadow, to look at why you tolerate disrespect in the first place, to examine the wounds that make you believe you deserve less than full respect. And that journey starts right now, because Jung is about to show you exactly how toxic people operate psychologically, what they're feeding on in you, and how to starve them, not by fighting them, but by finally learning to respect yourself so completely that their behavior becomes impossible in your presence. There's a reason certain people can walk into a room and immediately command respect, while others get walked over no matter how hard they try, and it has nothing to do with confidence tricks or dominance games. Jung discovered it's about something far deeper. It's about the relationship you have with your own shadow, the parts of yourself you've rejected, denied, made wrong. And every toxic person in your life has found those parts like a heat-seeking missile. They've located the exact places where you abandon yourself, where you betray your own needs, where you choose peace over truth. And they've set up camp. They're feeding on your self-betrayal. You see, toxic people aren't actually powerful. They're parasitic. They can only survive in environments where someone has already wounded themselves, where someone has already decided they don't matter as much as keeping the peace or being liked or avoiding conflict. Jung called this psychological vampirism, and he understood that vampires can only enter when you invite them in. And you invite them in every time you silence your truth to avoid confrontation, every time you excuse behavior you know is unacceptable, every time you convince yourself that setting a boundary would make you the bad guy. Think about the last time someone disrespected you. Really think about that moment before you responded. There was a choice point, a moment where you felt the violation, where your psyche registered, this is not okay. And then what did you do? Did you speak up immediately, clearly without apology, or did you hesitate? Did you rationalize? Did you tell yourself, maybe I'm being too sensitive, maybe I'm overreacting, maybe if I just let it go, this time it'll get better? That hesitation, that's the invitation. That's the moment you chose the toxic person over yourself, and they felt it. Even if you said nothing, they registered that you don't respect yourself enough to enforce your own boundaries. And that's when they knew they could do it again and again and again. Jung understood that toxic people are incredibly skilled at reading unconscious signals. They can sense within seconds whether you truly value yourself or Whether you're performing self-respect while internally doubting your worth, and here's the devastating truth. You can't fake self-respect. Your unconscious mind broadcasts your true self-valuation in 1,000 microsignals: body language, tone, hesitation, over-explaining. The toxic person reads all of it and adjusts their behavior accordingly. This is why affirmations don't work. Why reading about boundaries doesn't change anything. Why you can know intellectually that you deserve respect but still find yourself tolerating disrespect, because the knowledge is in your conscious mind, but the wound is in your unconscious. And toxic people speak directly to your unconscious. They bypass your rational mind and plug straight into your shame, your guilt, your fear of abandonment, your desperate need to be liked, and they exploit it, not necessarily consciously. Most toxic people are just as unconscious as their victims. They're operating on instinct, following the scent of unhealed wounds, because that's where they can feed. Jung saw this pattern repeatedly in his clinical work. The people who struggled most with toxic relationships weren't weak or stupid. They were unconscious of their own psychology. They had parts of themselves they refused to look at, parts they'd rather tolerate abuse than face. And those parts became the hook that toxic people use to control them. So what are these parts? What is it inside you that toxic people are actually feeding on? First, there's the part that believes love must be earned, that you have to be good enough, perfect enough, useful enough to deserve respect. This part was likely installed in childhood by parents or caregivers who made their love conditional, who taught you that your worth was tied to your performance, your compliance, your ability to make them happy. Toxic people can smell this wound from miles away, because you'll do anything to prove your worth to them. You'll tolerate disrespect, you'll work harder, you'll give more, you'll sacrifice your own needs, all to earn the respect that should have been freely given, and they'll never give it, because your desperation to earn it is exactly what makes you valuable to them. Then there's the part that's terrified of conflict, that equates boundaries with meanness, that believes if you stand up for yourself, you're being difficult or aggressive or unkind. Jung understood this as the shadow's rejection. You've made your own healthy anger, your own assertiveness, your own self-protection wrong, and banished it to the unconscious. And now it only emerges in passive-aggressive ways or explosive outbursts, neither of which command respect. Toxic people love this dynamic because they can push and push and push, knowing you won't respond directly. And when you finally snap, they can play victim and make you the problem. There's also the part that's addicted to being needed, that derives its entire sense of worth from being useful, from fixing, from saving, from being the strong one, the reliable one, the one who always understands. Jung called this the savior complex, and toxic people are experts at activating it. They'll present themselves as broken, as needy, as unable to function without you, and you'll feel powerful in your ability to help, never realizing that you're not helping, you're enabling, and in the process, teaching them that your needs don't matter, that your boundaries are negotiable, that you exist to serve their dysfunction. And perhaps most insidiously, there's the part that's still trying to heal an old wound through this toxic person. Maybe they remind you of a parent who never approved of you, and some unconscious part of you believes that if you can just get this person to respect you, you'll finally heal that childhood wound. This is repetition compulsion, Jung's term for the way we unconsciously recreate our earliest traumas, hoping this time the outcome will be different, but it never is, because you're trying to get from a toxic person what they're fundamentally incapable of giving. All of these parts, these wounded aspects of yourself, are what toxic people feed on. And here's what Jung wants you to understand: you cannot protect what you do not respect if you don't respect your own time. Toxic people will waste it if you don't respect your own energy. Toxic people will drain it if you don't respect your own truth. Toxic people will gaslight it if you don't respect your own boundaries. Toxic people will violate them. The toxic person isn't the problem. They're the symptom. The problem is your relationship with yourself. And that's actually good news, because it means you have all the power you've been giving away. You don't need them to change. You don't need them to suddenly see your worth. You don't need them to apologize or acknowledge or improve. You need to see your own worth. And the moment you do, really do, at the unconscious level where it counts, their behavior becomes intolerable, not in an angry way, not in a bitter way, but in a simple, factual way, like you wouldn't tolerate someone throwing garbage in your living room. You don't tolerate someone throwing garbage into your psyche, but getting there requires you to do something. Most people refuse. You have to stop focusing on their toxicity and start examining your own tolerance for it. You have to stop asking, why are they like this? And start asking, why do I allow this? You have to stop trying to change them and start changing the part of you that accepted less than you deserve. And that's terrifying because it means taking full responsibility, not for their behavior, but for your response to it. It means admitting you've been betraying yourself. It means facing the fact that on some level you've agreed to this dynamic. And that realization, that's where real change begins. That's where self-respect stops being a concept and starts being a lived reality. Jung understood something that most psychology misses. Boundaries don't work when they come from fear. When you set a boundary because you're afraid of being hurt, you're still operating from the wound. You're still giving the toxic person power over you because your boundary is about them. It's a defense, a protection, a way to control their behavior. But Jung taught that real boundaries don't try to control anyone else. They're simply a statement of what you will and won't participate in. They're not about changing the other person. They're about honoring yourself. And there's a massive psychological difference. Think about it when you say to someone, you need to stop treating me this way. What you're really saying is, your behavior determines my well-being. You have the power to hurt me, so please stop using that power. You're still making yourself dependent on their choice, and toxic people hear that dependency and they know they still have control over you. But when you operate from true self-respect, the statement changes. It becomes, I don't participate in relationships where I'm disrespected. Notice the difference. You're not asking them to change. You're not even addressing their behavior. You're simply stating what you do and don't do. And here's what happens that Jung observed over and over in his work. When you make that shift, when you stop defending your boundaries and start embodying them, toxic people have one of two reactions. They either immediately change their behavior around you because they sense you're no longer available for the old dynamic, or they exit your life on their own because you're no longer feeding whatever wound in them needs someone to disrespect. And this happens without confrontation, without drama, without you having to convince anyone of anything, because you're not trying to change them anymore. You've changed yourself at the frequency level and they can feel it. But most people never get to this point because they're still trying to make the toxic person understand. They're still explaining, justifying, defending their right to respect. And every explanation is another invitation. Every justification is more evidence that you're not sure of your own worth. Because when you truly respect yourself, you don't explain it, you don't defend it, you don't negotiate it. You simply live it and let others adjust or leave. Jung called this individuation the process of becoming so firmly rooted in your own self-knowledge and self-respect that external validation becomes irrelevant. And when you reach that state, toxic people literally can't touch you, not because you've built walls, but because there's nothing in you for their toxicity to hook into. You're not seeking their approval, so their disapproval has no power. You're not afraid of their anger, so their intimidation tactics fail. You're not guilty about disappointing them, so their manipulation doesn't work. You've integrated the shadow parts of yourself that they were feeding on, and now there's nothing for them to feed on. But here's where it gets deep, where Jung's teaching becomes truly transformative. The toxic people in your life aren't just random. They're specifically designed by your unconscious to show you exactly which parts of yourself you still haven't integrated. If someone constantly criticizes you, they're showing you where you criticize yourself. If someone invalidates your feelings, they're showing you where you invalidate your own feelings. If someone takes advantage of your generosity, they're showing you where you abandon your own needs to take care of others. The toxic person is a mirror, and until you look at what they're reflecting, you'll keep smashing mirrors, wondering why you keep getting cut. This is projection, one of Jung's most important discoveries. You don't see the world as it is, you see it as you are. And every person in your life, especially the ones who trigger you the most, is showing you something about your own unconscious. The narcissist in your life is showing you where you abandon yourself. The manipulator is showing you where you manipulate yourself. Out of your own truth, The person who never takes responsibility is showing you where you won't take responsibility for your own well-being. And the person who doesn't respect you is showing you in precise detail exactly how you don't respect yourself. So the question isn't, how do I deal with this toxic person? The question is, what is this person showing me about myself that I'm not willing to see? And when you ask that question, when you really sit with it, something miraculous happens. You stop being a victim. You stop giving your power away. You stop waiting for them to change. And you start seeing the toxic relationship as what it actually is: a teacher, a mirror, an opportunity to integrate the parts of yourself you've been rejecting. Jung believed that every external conflict is an internal conflict projected outward. And every person who makes you feel small is showing you where you make yourself small, where you shrink, where you silence your truth, where you betray your own knowing. And once you see it, once you really see it, you can't unsee it, and you can't go back to tolerating it, because now you understand it's not about them, it's about you. And that realization is simultaneously devastating and liberating. Devastating because you have to give up the victim story. You have to stop blaming them for how you feel. You have to take full ownership of your response to their behavior. But liberating, because if you're the problem, you're also the solution. If your tolerance for disrespect is the issue, then your transformation of that tolerance is the answer. And unlike their behavior, which you can't control, your own psychology is completely within your power to change. But that change requires something specific, something Jung was very clear about. You have to face your shadow. You have to look at the parts of yourself you've made wrong, the anger you've suppressed, the needs you've denied the truth. You've silenced the boundaries you've betrayed, and you have to bring them into consciousness. You have to own them, accept them, integrate them, because whatever you reject in yourself, you'll attract in others. If you reject your own anger, you'll attract people who rage at you. If you reject your own needs, you'll attract people who are endlessly needy. If you reject your own power, you'll attract people who overpower you. The shadow always finds a way to be seen, and it will use other people to show you what you refuse to look at in yourself. So respecting yourself in front of toxic people isn't about techniques or strategies or clever comebacks. It's about shadow work. It's about becoming so conscious of your own psychology that there's no wound left for them to exploit, no dependency for them to manipulate, no fear for them to leverage. And when you do that work, when you really do it toxic, people either transform around you or disappear from your life, because you've stopped broadcasting the signal that attracted them in the first place. You've stopped being a match for their frequency. And Jung promised that when you reach that level of self-integration, you don't have to worry about toxic people anymore, because you've become psychologically immune to toxicity. Not because you're defended, but because you're whole. Here's what happens in the actual moment. When a toxic person tries their usual tactics and you've done the inner work, they say something disrespectful, something that used to make you doubt yourself or scramble to explain or feel that familiar knot of anxiety in your stomach. But this time, something's different. This time, you notice the comment, you hear it, you register that it's inappropriate, but there's no emotional charge, there's no wound for it to land in. You don't feel the need to defend yourself or convince them or make them understand. You just observe it like you'd observe a cloud passing in the sky, and then you respond not from reaction, but from clarity. Maybe you say, that doesn't work for me, or I don't engage with people who speak to me that way. Or you say nothing at all and simply remove yourself from the situation. No explanation, no justification, no anger, just a simple, clear choice to not participate. And here's what Jung observed in that moment. The toxic person will often escalate. They'll try harder to get the reaction they're used to getting from you. They might get more aggressive or play victim or try to guilt you because your calm, centered response has disrupted their pattern. And they're unconsciously trying to pull you back into the familiar dynamic. This is the test, and how you respond determines everything. If you engage, if you try to explain, if you defend your boundary, if you show any sign that you need them to understand or approve, then you've given them back the power, and the pattern continues. But if you remain anchored in your own self-respect, if you stay clear and unmoved, not because you're suppressing emotion, but because there genuinely is no wound for them to activate, then something shifts. They feel it, even if they don't understand it. They sense that the old dynamic is no longer available and they have to choose continue the toxic behavior and lose access to you or adjust their behavior to match your new standard. And some will adjust. You'll be amazed at how quickly a toxic person can become respectful when they realize disrespect simply doesn't work on you anymore, when they sense that you're not seeking their validation, not afraid of their disapproval, not guilty about your boundaries. They often naturally shift their behavior because the payoff they were getting, the power, the control, the emotional supply is gone, but others won't adjust. And Jung said, this is actually perfect information. These are the people who are only in your life because of your wound, because of what they could extract from you. And when the wound heals, when you stop offering what they were taking, they have no reason to stay and they'll leave on their own, usually while making you the villain, while saying you've changed, while accusing you of being cold or selfish or different. And Jung would say, let them leave, let them make you the villain, because their departure is proof that you've healed the part of yourself that needed their approval. You've integrated the shadow that was attracting their toxicity. You've stopped abandoning yourself, and anyone who can't respect that has no place in your life. This is where most people get stuck. They understand the psychology. They do the inner work, they start to change, but then when the toxic person gets upset or leaves, they feel guilty. They think, maybe I'm being too harsh. Maybe I should give them another chance. Maybe I'm the one being toxic now. And that guilt, that's the wound trying to pull you back. It's the old pattern, the one that says your worth is determined by how much you're willing to tolerate to keep someone in your life. But Jung would ask you, sit with that guilt. Where does it come from? Whose voice is it? Really, is it your true self, your integrated self, saying this? Or is it the wounded child who learned that love is conditional, that belonging requires self-betrayal, that being good means accepting less than you deserve? Because if you listen carefully, you'll notice that guilt isn't about the other person, it's about you. It's the last gasp of the shadow trying to maintain the familiar pattern, even though the familiar pattern was killing you. And this is the moment, the crucial moment, where you have to choose the old, comfortable, painful dynamic, where you betray yourself to keep them comfortable, or the new, uncertain, liberating reality, where you honor yourself and let the chips fall where they may. Jung called this the death of the ego, and it is a kind of death, the death of the version of you that needed to be liked, that feared confrontation, that believed peace was more important than truth. That person has to die for the integrated self to be born. And that death feels like grief. It feels like loss. It feels like maybe you're doing something wrong, but you're not. You're doing something right for the first time, and it feels wrong because it's unfamiliar, because every cell in your body, every neural pathway in your brain is wired for the old pattern, and now you're creating a new pattern, and that takes tremendous psychological courage. But here's what's waiting on the other side of that. Death, Jung saw this in every patient who successfully individuated. On the other side of that death is freedom, real freedom, not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom to be who you actually are, without apology, without negotiation, without needing anyone's permission. And in that freedom, toxic people simply cannot exist, because toxicity requires a host. It requires someone who will absorb the poison. And when you're no longer available to absorb it, when you've developed such a strong sense of self that disrespect literally bounces off you, not because you're defended, but because you're clear, then toxic people have two choices: become non-toxic around you or leave. And either way, you win, because you've stopped betraying yourself, you've stopped choosing them over you, you've stopped participating in your own disrespect. And that's what self-respect actually is: not a feeling, not a thought, but a consistent pattern of choices. Choices to honor your truth even when it's uncomfortable. Choices to enforce your boundaries even when others disapprove. Choices to value your well-being even when it costs you relationships that were never really serving you. And the beautiful thing Jung discovered is that when you make these choices, when you consistently choose yourself, something unexpected happens. You don't become selfish or isolated or cold. You become more loving, more compassionate, more present, because you're no longer depleted by toxic dynamics. You're no longer managing other people's emotions or walking on eggshells or trying to earn respect that should have been freely given. You're just being yourself fully, completely, unapologetically. And that energy that was going into managing toxic people is now available for real connection, for relationships built on mutual respect, for people who don't need to be convinced of your worth because they see it immediately, because you see it. And what you value in yourself, others will value in you. This is the law Jung spent his life studying. You attract what you are not, what you want. If you want respect, become respectable. Not in the eyes of others, but in your own eyes. If you want healthy relationships, become healthy, not by fixing yourself, but by integrating yourself, by making peace with your shadow, by owning all of you, the light and the dark, the strength and the vulnerability, the boundaries and the openness. And when you do that, when you become whole, the toxic people fall away like dead leaves, and what remains are the relationships that were always meant to be the ones based on truth, on authenticity, on mutual respect, on real love, not the conditional, transactional, manipulative thing that masquerades as love in toxic dynamics, but the real thing, the kind of connection that doesn't drain you but fills you. And you'll look back at the toxic relationships, and instead of anger or resentment, you'll feel something unexpected gratitude because those people, those difficult, painful relationships, were your greatest teachers. They showed you exactly where you needed to heal. They forced you to face your shadow. They wouldn't let you keep betraying yourself. And in doing so, they pushed you toward the one thing that actually matters: knowing yourself, respecting yourself, being yourself without apology. And that's the gift. That's what Jung saw in every psychological crisis, every toxic relationship, every painful pattern. It's all an invitation, an opportunity, a chance to wake up, to integrate, to become whole. And the moment you accept that invitation, the moment you stop seeing toxic people as the problem and start seeing them as the mirror, everything changes. You stop trying to change them and start changing yourself. You stop defending your worth and start embodying it. You stop explaining your boundaries and start living them. And in that shift, in that fundamental transformation of your relationship with yourself, you become untouchable. Not because you've built walls, but because you become whole. And wholeness doesn't need to protect itself from toxicity, because there's nothing for toxicity to grab onto, no wound to exploit, no need to fulfill, no fear to leverage, just clear, unshakable self-respect. And when you carry that, when you embody that toxic, people feel it immediately, and they either rise to meet you at that level or they exit your life quietly, without drama, without confrontation, without you having to do anything except be yourself. And that's the ultimate respect. Not something you demand from others, but something you give to yourself so completely that others have no choice but to mirror it back to you.